So I do want to say that Greg has been with us, as I said, since mid-August. This is, I think, of kind of a trial by fire for him as a new president of this organization, and in fact, in a role that he has not held before. So we on the board have been tremendously grateful to him for the great leadership he has provided in keeping things going at CRL. Now, CRL is, the staff are working remotely there too. The building is closed, so it is functioning the way most of our libraries are functioning. And the services, though, have been continuing seamlessly, and Greg and the leadership team have really been working hard to position CRL, and again, to be sure that as much is being done for member institutions as possible. Greg has also spent a lot of this year working with the board, and we've had a lot of excellent conversations with him as he's come into CRL. He, of course, knew it as a librarian and CRL member and user over the course of his career, but now he's come in and he's been able to assess from the inside, and he's been talking with the board about the opportunities that he sees for CRL in the future, and really thinking about the ways that he wants to understand what our libraries are going through and figure out how to continue to make CRL as an important piece of the information landscape as it has been in the past. So thank you again for coming. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Greg Yao, CRL's president.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much. So this is my first annual meeting as CRL president, and I think it's entirely appropriate that the first things you hear from me are that. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I thank the CRL staff for getting arranged to not just have one meeting, but two in short order. I thank the board and the officers for all the work that they're doing. I thank Catherine Skinner for working to be helping to be a facilitator for us today, and I thank the collections committee for working as a program committee of sorts to plan not one but two different meetings. And I thank all of you for taking time out of your day to spend some time thinking about CRL. That's the first thing I want you to hear from me as president, is thank you. The second thing I want you to hear from me is that your time invested thinking about CRL, contributing to CRL, is time well spent. Because I think CRL is really, really, really important. And as Jenny said, I'm 8 months into being a president at an organization. I'm in a new city, in a new role, and experiencing challenges as we all are. And if you asked me, a year ago, would I take the job now, knowing what I know now? The answer is absolutely, absolutely yes. And I mean, ask me 10 times, and the 9 times I'd say yes. The one time I'd say no is because I'm from Boston, I miss the ocean, right? But I think that the work we do here is really, really critically important. I think CRL has been doing critically important work for decades. And I think that the foundation we set here together for where CRL goes in the future is critically important. And COVID only makes that more the case rather than less so. Now, I'm a new president, and so I want my remarks to set the stage I want to be the beginning of a conversation between me and the CRL community. And so I've really outlined my whole remarks for this first president's report to really set the foundation for our community to have a conversation together for the rest of today, tomorrow, and going forward as we take CRL into its new future. And so I've organized my remarks into 3 categories. One, I would like us to begin aligning on the value proposition. Why does CRL exist? Why do I think it's so important? Why do we all think it's so important? Why are we all taking time out of our days under, at best, unusual circumstances to talk about CRL? So why CRL? What are we fighting for? Right. The second one is to begin establishing a shared understanding of the current state. what is CRL really? What is CRL? What is it in terms of staffing and workflows? What is it doing? I've been really doing an organizational diagnosis over the last several months, and I want to invite you in into the journey that I've been going on and share with you what I've been learning about CRL. And then for the third part of my talk, I'll just finish up with outlining briefly the path ahead. What are the steps going forward? Where do we go from here? Well, let's start on why. The existential question: Why CRL? Why CRL? Now, as I look out on the audience and the people that are participating on this call, I see some of my closest and dearest friends, people who have known me professionally very, very well, worked with me very closely for a number of years, close friends. But I also see a lot of folks that I don't know at all. And so I call you future friends, but there are people that probably don't know me. And so I wanted to start this section, why CRL, with a story. And a story that illustrates why I believe so much in CRL and how I got to be here with you today. And here's the story. About 12 years ago, I had a fantastic job, a job that I really could have seen myself in for the rest of my career. I was a history librarian at Yale. Right? And I had two parts of my job, right? So part of my job was public services, right? Work with faculty and students and help them be successful, public services. The other half was collection development, right? Build collections that would help people go about their research. So fantastic role, two parts. And I had this fantastic mentor at Yale, and would get lunch every month, every couple of months, and should give me advice on how to be better at my job. And on one of these lunches, I said to her, I'm interested in going into a leadership position. I'm interested in going into management and leadership. And what should I be doing? What could I be doing if I want to move into leadership? And my mentor looked at me and she said, well, the first thing I'll tell you, Greg, is this. Don't go into collections. Don't go into collections. Just don't do it. Just whatever you do, don't go into collections. And this is someone who's very smart. It was great advice, fantastic advice. In fact, let's talk about why it was such a good advice. This was about, I was working at Yale and she's saying don't go into collections. And we're in the middle of a financial crisis about this time, right? And Dan Hazen, someone I didn't know, but who was working up the road at Harvard, wrote this fantastic article really talking about how libraries could respond to the financial crisis. And in this article he wrote, he talks about academic and research libraries, confronting really daunting financial pressures and how these financial pressures really just amplify an already existing existential crisis, right? And then he says, in the world of collections, those are particularly uncertain. Collections are particularly dicey, right? In another article, he referred to collections as being an alien landscape, right? So collections are a particularly, troublesome area, and that's what my mentor wanted me to steer clear of, right? So, Greg, whatever you do, steer clear of collections. And I did pretty much everything I could do, which would be the opposite of that advice, right? I did everything. I went long on collections. I said, all right, that's great advice. I understand where you're coming from. And I worked with Daniel Dollar, assistant, librarian, assistant director of collections at Yale, working on how do we, remake our collections budgets to position them for an electronic environment. How do we how do we negotiate really effectively with vendors in an e-resources environment? After that, I went to Harvard. I went and worked for Dan Hazen, right? And I did even a deeper dive on collections, from data to incunables and artist books, really trying to study collections from end to end. And then I went to MIT, where I worked on open access and open data, and it was my team at MIT that signed the first transformational open access agreement in North America. So I went long on collections. And then when CRL called and said they're looking for a president, I said, look, anything CRL needs, I'll do. Because to me, CRL is one of the world's most important collections-focused consortia, period. And so I believe so much in that in the mission of CRL, I had to be a part of it. And so when I think about collections, my mentor was right. Stay away from them because that's where you're going to be. Your hair is going to go white, and there's just all these dicey issues. So, for instance, we have these traditional workflows, right? Building print collections and approval plans, right? We have traditional workflows that aren't optimally mapped to where we need to be going, but they're not irrelevant. They're still important, right? We have this new environment we need to be in, but we don't have the workflows and everything in place in this new environment, right? And how we navigate from one environment to the next, if we get it wrong, there are real consequences. And who has access to information, who doesn't, over time, right? The cultural record could be negatively impacted. So it's a really complex environment and the stakes are high. And so I understand what my mentor said, stay away from collections. But what I realized was that was the wrong posture. Right? For all the reasons why you might want to avoid collections because it was a really difficult area, right? And the consequences could be dire. I realized that the right posture was, well, to the extent that you answer those questions right, you actually can really have an incredible beneficial, impact on the scholarly information landscape. And it was really not so much a crisis, but an opportunity. And that's why I went into collections, did a deep dive on collections, didn't take any of the advice my wonderful mentor gave me, and why I'm here at CRL. Because we have an opportunity to actually shape the entire infrastructure for how information is captured, shared, and disseminated, and bend it to our values. So when I think about the complexity in collections, there are models for how we navigate this alien landscape, this fluid landscape. I won't spend too much time here because I assume most of you are familiar with this framework from Lorcan Dempsey. But the two frameworks that Lorcan talks about is the inside-out library and the facilitated collection. And the inside-out library being the library where collections aren't just books and journals that we purchase from the outside for a local set of users, but it's the institutional repositories and the digital scholarship and the data sets, all the content that's generated locally and that's it's disseminated for a global audience, right? So the inside-out library is one framing that helps us understand this complex collections environment. And the other model is this facilitated collection. Rather than building local collections, building networks of building collections so that collections can be shared across networks of players in ways that allow us to build really wonderful collections, but do so effectively and collaboratively. So CRL is very, very well positioned to be in the facilitated collection space, has been for years. And going forward, we'll have to really get CRL in that inside-out library space. But anyway, why CRL? So why CRL? Well, one way of looking at CRL would be cost containment, right? So we share costs related to collections by rationalizing collection acquisitions. We improve negotiation power, right? We use our scale to get better deals from vendors. And then, of course, we share the cost of collection stewardship, right? We all don't have to be warehousing collections locally. We can save money and find efficiencies by doing it at scale, right? So why CRL? Well, one why is cost containment, and that's a really important one. But that's not why I came to Chicago from Boston. That's not what inspires me. What inspires me about CRL is that CRL is a platform for us to advance our missions as research libraries and empower our values as research librarians. We can actively shape knowledge production to promote openness. We can embrace inclusivity and empower diversity in the research library community. There are many different kinds of institutions, all research libraries, but we're geographically dispersed and have different size research libraries in the CRL community. We can also work together to curate a diverse and equitable scholarly record for the benefit of all, not for the benefit of the few, but the benefit of all. And so when I think of CRL, it's cost containment, but really much more importantly, it's the ability to shape the emerging knowledge ecosystem. That's why CRL is so important. That's why I think the work we do here is so important. And the work we do today and going forward, laying the foundation for where we go forward is so critical. So that's the why, the existential why. That's why I think CRL is so unbelievably important. So the second goal of this session is establish shared understanding of our current state. What is CRL? What is CRL? When I think about what is CRL, I think that those of us that have worked with CRL for a long time might think they have the answer to this. But as I've done my listening tour, I've found that this question seems to be, I get many different answers as I go and listen to folks about what is CRL. And a lot of folks, even in organizations that are deeply embedded in the CRL community, I find that they're not terribly familiar with what CRL is up to. And so this is actually an important question for us to gain clarity on as a community. When I think about what CRL is, I think about, well, first principles and mission, and what was it created to do to begin with. So here's something from the first annual report. The first CRL annual report, summer 1950, it says, university administrators are concerned about the library taking up so much money, right? So scholars are concerned they're not going to get resources they need, right? In the middle are librarians frustrated, right? This is a common. This is our world, right? And it said the time had come to take a bold stand against unconditional acceptance of traditional policy and to seek through cooperation, to prevent duplication, confusion, and the fragmentary service that seemed to lie ahead. So this is what we were formed to do. We were formed to answer some of the most difficult challenges facing research librarians in the world of collections. In 1950, that was building analog collections from around the world, and that's important, and that's something that CRL's done well for years and will continue to do. But I think when I think about library collections and I think about the most pressing issues, that's not what comes top of mind, and I think there's a chance for us to take the infrastructure for what CRL is, and to move it into new spaces. So, for me, as I've been exploring CRL, meeting with the staff, talking with the board, talking with many of you, I've been thinking about using different lenses, different framings to think about what CRL is, right? And one way I've been thinking about CRL is an ARL library, just an ARL library like any other ARL library. Now, we're an ARL member, library, but we're an ARL library of a particular type. We're an ARL library of libraries, right? Our membership is made up of many libraries from across Canada, the United States, liberal arts colleges, mid-sized public institutions, large ARL institutions. So we're an ARL library, right? We have all of the staffing and departments and operations and facility that you'd expect of an ARL library. We're Academy-owned infrastructure. Another way to look at CRL is we're Academy-owned infrastructure. We're not a vendor. We're not a vendor providing a service. We're part of the Academy-owned infrastructure by governance structure, by business model. Look at the email address, right? That's maybe just a symbolic thing, but it's an important one. Right? It's an edu, right? It's crl.edu. I think that's a symbol that really captures what CRL is. CRL is, of course, also a collective collection. Collective collection of 5 million analog collections, distinctive collections from around the world, 80 million plus pages of digital content, including content from rarely held global collections, right? So it's a collective collection. So CRL is all of these things, and when I think of what CRL's promise is, and where I'd love to really activate CRL's potential, is this. CRL really administratively is completely set up to be a fully integrated workflow platform for research libraries to build, steward, and disseminate research collections at scale. Not just managing shared print after collections are built. We could interlock approval plans and selection and discovery. We can actually just really interlock our staffing and our workflows deeply. And I think if we did so, we could actually save money, have a lot of fun, and build a better collection collectively than we ever could before. But this is really the promise of CRL. So I started last August, and this is the activity. So I'm only 8 months in, but here's the timeline of my work to date. Right, the timeline is I started in August, had a staff retreat in October, first all-day CRL board meeting in November to talk about some strategic directions. And then we have this the meeting today, which will give us a chance to really get together and have a more robust conversation as the CRL community. And what I've been doing in my 8 months is really trying to learn as much as I can about the current state of CRL. And I've been trying to going on listening tours, reading all the reading lots and lots of reports, lots of conversations, and trying to do a real quick organizational analysis. And do that analysis to get insights. Right? I want insights, and I want to turn those insights into action. Right? That's what I'm trying to do. Right? Do an analysis, turn that analysis into insight, act on that insight, actionable insight. And so some insights I wanted to share with you as part of this diagnostic I've done in CRL. Is a few of the insights I've made is that CRL is really, really busy. Really busy. And I wasn't sure about that when I came in, because when I was at MIT, CRL really just wasn't on my radar as much as I would have thought it would be. And so I was wondering what was going on at CRL. And when I showed up, just running projects on top of projects. And you can look at the annual report to get an idea of what those projects are. But the staff were really, really, really busy. Lots and lots of projects in various stages of completion. CRL is really, really busy. While I was heartened to see all of the great work that was taking place, I have to confess I was actually really concerned about capacity and what the prioritization models for how projects were decided on greenlit. I was concerned about how we were actually using our resources. It was so CRL was busy. Diversity was a core strength. Diversity is a core strength. Now, as a collections person, that didn't surprise me, because CRL has been dedicated to building rare, distinct, rarely held global collections. So we don't just have Anglophone collections. We have many, many languages captured in our collections, and many different regions of the world that captured in our collections. Diversity is a clear strength in our collections. But what I didn't realize until I got to CRL and I got to know the staff was how strong diversity is reflected in our staff. Now, when I worked in different environments, one of the leadership challenges we had was building a more diverse workforce. I think some numbers I've seen is that research libraries, the workforce is about 90% white, which oftentimes puts us out of sync with our own campuses and society at large. And when I got to CRL, about 50% of the CRL staff are people of color. About 50%. And with the senior leadership team I have in place, it's over 50%. And that's well out of step, I think, with some of the trends in research libraries, and out of step, and to me, in one of the most wonderful ways possible. So diversity is a core strength at CRL. And another insight I had was that the governance model of CRL and the membership model not fully understood. And the visibility of CRL really, really, really quite low. It was really under the radar. So those are some organizational insights. So based on those insights, turn those insights into an action plan. We have 2 organizational priorities that I've identified. And here I share some of the action we've taken against those insights, right? So on the one hand, with CRL being busy, but not there was CRL was being really busy, but we didn't have enough structures in place internally to allow the staff to work seamlessly across the whole organization, right? So we built an executive leadership team, all right, to help us to build an administrative layer within CRL. Established the first head of diversity and inclusion initiatives position. Repurposed an existing position to create this position. Consolidated administrative units, so HR, facilities management, budget and finance, consolidated all of those administrative units into a single area that allows us to find efficiencies in our workflows. Been doing a lot of intentional culture change, right? Really working on building learning organization principles into the CRL organizational culture. So lots of teamwork, a lot of learning, really fostering a collaborative organization within CRL. And as part of that, we implemented an OKR goal structure. Some of you may be familiar with OKRs, but it's a simple goal structure where we outline 1 or 2 organizational priorities And then every single unit puts specific actions that they are taking against those priorities in a spreadsheet that all staff can read. So every member of CRL staff can see what the priorities are and see how their department's work fits into it. So we implemented OKR, goal setting it at CRL. The other priority was raising that external visibility. The external visibility I see as an existential need at CRL. We need to raise our external visibility. So we're remaking our CRL communications workflows and our membership workflows. So we're giving that a lot of attention. Developing our social media presence, actively building those our potential existing and potential partnerships, Linda Hall, Hati Trust, CRKN, and strategically trying to raise visibility through strategic conference attendance, really reconnecting with ARL and CNI, CRKN, but really raising that visibility. Now, 3 questions, fundamental questions that we'll have to answer. It's something I'm really working on, something we'll talk about today and tomorrow and going forward is why this scale, right? CRL started as a regional Midwest organization and then quickly grew to be a national organization. And then in the early 60s became binational. We're a Canadian consortium as much as we're a US consortium, right? So why the scale? What can we do with this scale that we wouldn't do at a local consortium, right? So we really need to think about why this scale and what are the unique advantages of that scale and leverage that unique advantage, right? So why this scale? Another question, why this scope? Right? Is CRL playing in the space with just distinctive analog collections? Or is it actually, is there much more opportunity to play in a much larger scope of activity? So why this scope? And the third one is why this governance and business model? We're a membership model, right? We're a membership model, which means by being a member, you should see CRL as just an extension of your local library, right? Your CRL colleagues are just another department in your local library. That's the governance and business model. But is that well understood and is that fully leveraged? I'm not sure. But those are 3 fundamental questions that I think our community needs to look at going forward. All right, so I talked about why CRL is so important, the existential question. Talked about a quick update on sort of what is the state of CRL, what is CRL. And then I don't need to talk now a bit about what's the path forward, how do we move forward. In the next few months, I think the immediate step forward is we really need to fully activate our governance. Later on in this meeting, we'll be announcing new CRL officers. We'll be electing new board members. But going forward, we need to be activating the full committee structure of CRL, have a really engaged governance structure. That's something we need to do going forward. We need to be engaging membership. We need to be much more engaged with membership. After this meeting, the intent was to go into some kind of strategic planning process in the summer. Now, I will be honest with you, I don't have a lot of patience for strategic planning because I think they can often take far too much time. I take a lot of time and resources, and I'm not sure what the return on investment is. So I want a strategic visioning process that is transparent. And I want it to be inclusive, and I want it to engage membership, but I also want it to be lightweight and action-oriented. And the way I'm thinking about that now, but I invite feedback, I want to be learning from this community, but I'm thinking about charging an external review, have some members of the CRL community be given the mission to write an external review, do an analysis of our assets and strategic directions, and present a review to me and the CRL community and the board for us to act on. But that's something I'm thinking about now. We need to go into some kind of strategic visioning, and I want it to be lightweight and action-oriented. The third thing we need to do going forward is we have to accelerate partnerships. I really want CRL to be deeply engaged in partnering with other organizations. Rosemont Shared Print, Hati Trust, Linda Hall, CRKN, NERL, LLMC. Really be actively partnering with other consortia. Right? And in the case of NERL, I'll be candid. I think in the case of NERL, I think the next step is time for us to work on a merger between CRL and NERL. NERL's been in CRL for a number of years. And I think the way that the neural community is developed and the way that the licensing environment has worked, the CRL's internal licensing has worked, there's lots of synergies to be leveraged there by bringing neural and CRL together. In terms of the action plan, here's the timeline I'm looking at. So I started in August, October did the staff retreat, November all-day board retreat, the annual meeting today and tomorrow. But then in the summer, that strategic planning process, want to launch that. And by the time we have the CRL board meeting in November, really want to be presenting the board with some specific directions, major projects that will be taking CRL meaningfully into the new future. So with that, talked about why CRL, gave an overview of what CRL is, the current state, and outlined an idea for how we can move forward. And with that, I want to use the remainder of our time to have a discussion. You can send your chat questions to James Simon, who will be sending them to me, and we can have a conversation. But with that, I just want to thank you for your time, and that's my president's report.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everyone. This is James. Just as a logistics reminder, you can use the chat function in WebEx to submit comments and questions. There is a blue bubble that appears at the bottom of your screen. If you haven't activated that, that will show the chat. And you can select James Simon from the drop-down list in the 2 to submit comments or questions. I also invite any of the panelists or board to lead off with any comments or questions they may have of Greg while we wait for responses. We are starting to get a few comments coming in.
I will say that I did get one message chat. It was about a microfilm set at the University of Missouri. And unless I was missing something, this might have slipped my mind, but it's not something that I recall. But apparently there's a very important microfilm set at the University of Missouri that CRL is a candidate to take on. I'm not familiar with this issue, but it's something that I'm happy to look at. But if it's an important collection at a CRL member library, then yeah, we'll talk about that. But anyway, let's take that offline. I just acknowledge that I see that chat. So.
Marvelous, great, good. The comments are now flowing freely, which is fantastic. I'll see if I can sort them out. Just first a comment. And again, I sent in the chat, if you prefer to remain anonymous in your comments or questions, you need to specify that because this is being recorded for the purposes of the minutes. So I will assume everyone has attributed themselves. Gwen Bird commented, Greg, that she fully supports the idea of an external review as part of the strategic planning process. She suggests this is a very valuable input into planning for the future. So you get a +1 on that.
All right.
Posey Agard commented that a common question she receives, or perhaps a common question in general, is what quantitative value does CRL provide? Do we release a report periodically?
Pardon me, the question is what? The question is?
What quantitative values does CRL provide? Is there a report that we refer to in terms of, the quantitative value of CRL?
Yeah, for that, James, I'd probably ask you to answer that. I mean, I'm thinking annual report, I'm thinking of all the different communication channels that we have. So I think there's 2 ways to answer that. One, there's the what do we have now? And then there's the other way to answer that is what could we have, right? And so I think if we were talking about what reports we have now, there's all the different annual reports or communication channels we already have. But presumably the question is more geared towards meeting a need that we're not meeting already. So the idea is, the question I would have for the CRL communities. What kind of information are we not providing already that we should be providing? And then we can come up with a plan for getting that information out. But in terms of outlining what we already provide, I would not be the best person to answer that, just to be totally candid.
No, that's right. So, Posey, the kind of metrics that we frequently collect include the inputs into the collection, the use of the materials, the number of downloads for the CRL collections. But increasingly, we're providing more qualitative measures of the value of CRL membership. The number of participants in our annual meeting, the special webinars that people present at, the number of initiatives that are created through our E Desiderata program. So good metrics are developing in this, and as Greg said, we're really interested in knowing how the members want to receive the information about the value proposition of CRL. Great. Here's another question. Just sorting through these. Jeff Kosakov wrote question, what directions might CRL take to help further influence the scholarly communication ecosystem in the name of fairness, inclusion, and openness?
Right. No, I mean, it's a great question. It's what is our open access posture? And so for me, look, it's my first presidential, address, so I'm just going to answer really, really candidly. So maybe I'll answer in a way that really explains how I view open access and democratizing access to information. For me, when I think about collections, I think about collections along an entire landscape, right? A whole spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum, I've got rare books and cunables, artist books, on one end. On the other end, I've got data sets, open science data sets, right? And for me, there needs to be an open access posture or a strategy for expanding access to information along every part of that spectrum, right? But because those kinds of collections are very, very different, just in terms of every single attendant workflow around them, from acquisition to preservation to discovery and use, how openness is advanced for those different kinds of collections or resources along that spectrum will be different. And I believe very strongly when it comes to research collections that you need to have an openness strategy for all of that content. Now, I give that long-winded answer because when I paused before I jumped in on an answer, I was thinking right away, I'm going to jump in on Neural. I'm going to start talking about big deals and packages and breaking big deals, right? But the fact of the matter is, I'm going to go there. But you need to have an openness strategy for rare books and special collections and unlocking those kinds of collections every bit as much as you do for the collections that are more traditionally associated with open access. I'll pause there. I think the more I look at it, the more when I look at CRL's internal licensing workflows and staffing, right? Working on negotiating deals to newspapers like the New York Times, Washington Post, foreign newspapers. When I look at those licensing workflows, looking at licenses, signing licenses, right? Access issues, and I look at Neural, right? Neural is running some of the largest negotiations with the major publishers, Elsevier, Wiley, Sage. I really see the opportunity for Neural and CRL licensing to be merged. And at that scale, you get something that looks like a national, binational if you include Canada, but a national, international licensing body. We don't have that in the United States, right? We have the California Digital Library that's able to do amazing work that has inspired me for a long time in California. But we really lack a national scale negotiation body, and Neural and CRL could play that role. And I think that if we bring Neural and CRL together, then all of a sudden you're negotiating with vendors at scale. And then you can do some really exciting things. One, you can get better licensing. Yeah, you can get better prices, better license terms. But then you can also make strategic investments, whether it's a transformative agreement, whether it's taking some money from saved negotiations and putting it into open resources, right? But that's the kind of I want CRL and NERL to be playing in an open access environment, and I think that's the path forward, right? I think that bring NERL into CRL and start working in an open access environment in that licensed environment. But when you're doing that, don't forget about all those other parts of the collection spectrum that also deserve to have strategies in thinking about openness and making them more available.
Thank you, Greg. There's been a couple remarks about NERL, and let me just group those together. Regina Roberts suggested that your comments about the potential merger with NERL is intriguing. What might be the adverse implications, if any? And a second question about NERL may be related. Hold on one second if I put them together. Given that that private institutions loom large in NERL while publics loom large in other consortia like the Big Ten, are the cultures compatible?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. That's a really, really good question about the cultures, and I would love to talk much more about that. The culture difference is really, really important. But let me talk about an even more difficult challenge, maybe more immediate. Talking about what are the downside with NERL coming in. One of my things I feel very strongly about is when you look at the consortia environment. And this is me, for years I've looked at the consortium environment, and it looks like a very crowded and confusing space. Right? And I think it should be much more rationalized. And I really think that finding partnerships where you can find partnerships, finding mergers where you can find mergers makes a lot of sense. But all consortia should be operating an environment knowing exactly what their unique value proposition is vis-a-vis all of the other consortia. And when I look at the licensing space, it's a really crowded space. Lots of regional consortia, lots of in different consortia. And I think that one of the downsides with NERL coming into CRL is if that comes in, if we don't articulate exactly what position it plays in that licensing environment, it could just be adding to more duplication and more churn, right? So if we bring CRL and NERL together, it has to be playing a unique a value proposition in that ecosystem. So that's a challenge that would have to be seen through. The other challenge that would have to be seen through would be governance and business models, and then of course the culture issues about the publics and the privates, and there's also the different sized institutions as well. But there are lots of issues to be worked out. Lots of issues to be worked out, but oftentimes when things are really worthwhile and they're really important, there are always issues to work out. So it's good to be aware of them, but they shouldn't give you pause, right? But I think that but those are really good points.
Right, good. Related to kind of the culture, the types of membership, Stephanie Davis Call asked a question. She said, "Good afternoon. I'm interested to hear how liberal arts colleges can contribute to CRL's mission and future."
Yeah. Oh boy, this is such an important question. So one of the things that I see as a real strength of CRL is that while we're an ARL library in our own right, we're made up of many different types of institutions, right? And as someone who's worked in ARL libraries for the vast majority of my career, I know that when I go to conferences and I'm able to intersect with professionals, with colleagues that work in different institutional contexts, I learn so much, right? The most powerful recent example I had of this is when I went to Teresa Bird's annual Digital Futures event that she hosts at the University of San Diego, where it really brings together librarians from all sorts of different institutional contexts. And I think that when you have conversations that bring together librarians from across the US and Canada, when you have publics and privates together, liberal arts colleges, mid-sized publics, public libraries, you really begin to flesh out that map. You really get a much better map of the knowledge ecosystem. And the more diverse, the more you can fill out the map, the more powerful you can be, the more actionable intelligence you have. And so the way I see it is that CRL doesn't work unless we have liberal arts colleges deeply a part of the community. I think the commitment to teaching, the commitment to teaching, the commitment to pedagogy in the liberal arts colleges is an incredible strength and something that needs to absolutely be leveraged. I also think that liberal arts colleges are feeling some pressures in terms of enrollment that I think that brings that perspective and helps us think about equity of information and the scholarly information ecosystem that, frankly, we wouldn't have if we didn't have the liberal arts colleges involved. In fact, when you look at the candidate slate for board members of the nominating committee, really this year took a really deep dive on thinking about institutional diversity on our board and in our governance. And I think that I think my perspective is that it makes sense for CRL to be a bit ARL heavy, a bit Carl heavy, right? But not too much. because if we get too heavy, then we lose that diversity of perspectives. And if we lose that diversity of perspectives, we lose one of the great value adds that CRL can have, which is the platform for research libraries at scale to come together. Right? By the way, about research libraries, when I was at MIT working on scholarly communications issues, one of the initiatives that really inspired me, and I thought was just a brilliant idea and worth pursuing as an experiment, was the Lever Press. That came out of the liberal arts community, and that was something that I always looked at. I looked at what Bryn Geffert was doing, what the liberal arts college community were doing in terms of open access. It's a real inspiration. And I think that when you add liberal arts colleges to transformative agreements and add and look at their perspective vis-a-vis those open access initiatives, it really enriches thinking about the costs and benefits of those kinds of programs. So liberal arts colleges are absolutely essential.
Right. I know we're running short of time and plenty of questions. Let me knock a couple out here. Denise Habay commented, "I appreciate your presentation, Greg. Great energy and thought that will help move CRL into its next phase of service. Could you provide your initial thoughts on partnerships with shared print consortia?"
Yeah. So shared print is an absolutely essential conversation, right? We can't all be warehousing these print collections locally, right? We have to be doing it collaboratively at scale. And so we all know that. And as I've watched the shared print, conversation develop over the last 10 years and participated in a number of those initiatives, I've been really happy with all of the initiatives and energy being thrown into that essential conversation. And I think that conversation, the shared print conversation, has reached the level of maturity where we can really start to consolidate things. So I think that the great strength of the last 10 years was all of the energy going into shared print. Now, the great weakness was that it was very much project on top of project on top of project, right? And so I think it's a bit of a confused environment. And so there's an opportunity to rationalize that ecosystem. And so I can say, as the head of as CRL, the president of CRL, I want CRL to play a very healthy partnership, adopt a very healthy partnering posture with the shared print community. And so one of the first things I did since arriving was to really build strong relationships and build strong ties with the Rosemont Shared Print Alliance. Really want CRL working harmoniously with Rosemont Shared Print. I think we should be joining Rosemont Shared Print. I want us to be working with the Alliance for the Book, but really act as a hub to bring together these communities so that we're working collaboratively and meeting ends collectively and having fun doing it, right? So relationships and trust networks really, really matter. And right out of the gate, I can say that one of my priorities is to really build strong relationships with other parts of that shared print ecosystem. It's going well. These are early days, but that's my That's my posture. Build strong relationships with the key organizations and partners in those spaces, and then try to rationalize it, because I think that's where we need to be in shared print.
Been told that we've run out of our designated time. There are easily a dozen more questions around the areas of digitization, of international licensing, of global partnerships in line with campuses. I think we just need to perhaps collect these and allow for more response after the meeting in order for us to be able to continue forward. So be assured, everyone, that I've collected all of the questions, and we'd be happy to consider ways to put this out in more thoughtful, more thoughtful time frame on this. So thank you, Greg, very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess in closing, I'll just say that really, as I said earlier, I intended my remarks today just to be the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it, right? So it's just the beginning of the conversation. And so we'll have time to pick up those conversations and unpack them much, much more fully today, tomorrow, and in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you.